Today we are going to discuss about what is Spring Boot and how Spring Boot application is working and what are all the features are there in Spring Boot framework. So yesterday we have created one simple REST API to display hello Spring Boot application, right? So let me start the server. So server is started successfully. Let me go to the browser and then let me, what is the URI which you have written? Hello World API. We have created Hello World API. API in the sense application programming and interface. Now let me hit the URL. So the moment I send the request from the browser, I got the response from the server like Hello Spring Boot application. Browser is the client and Hello Spring Boot application is our server which is deployed in Tomcat. So whenever I'm sending the request, I'm getting the response back saying that Hello Spring Boot application. What is the URI? Hello World is the URI which we have created. You can call it as a API also as API as well. So now before getting to more in Spring Boot, I want you to explain what is Spring Boot, what Spring Boot will do before Spring Boot, what kind of configurations we are doing. Okay, I'm going to explain you now. If you go, so everyone able to see my screen, right? So you can see Spring Boot. So Spring Boot is an open source tool. Open source in the sense it is not commercial. Like if you want, anyone can download and anyone can able to do the programs. What are all the frameworks available in Google? You can download Spring Initializer. From the Spring Initializer, you can create the project and you can download it and you can develop your own applications. For that, Spring Framework team, they are not going to charge any single rupee. Spring Boot framework and Spring all are open source frameworks. Open source in the nothing but it is not commercial frameworks. We no need to pay any money. So that is called open source. Spring Boot is an open source tool and used for developers to create standalone applications as well as production ready Spring applications. And it uses micro architecture which makes it most useful for creating microservices as well. Okay, microservices as well. So using Spring Boot we can create web applications, standalone applications and production ready the moment you create the Spring Boot application, we can deploy into server and we can production ready code is available default by default. And also before Spring Boot, so let me go to get down here. So Spring Boot, right? Yesterday we have written one program. So if you want to run one program in our server, so we need a Tomcat server. But yesterday we haven't downloaded the Tomcat server. Nothing. We just downloaded the project from the Spring Initializer. We have written one controller. We have written one method, one API, and then executed successfully. We haven't written any code, any configuration files, nothing. Everything taken care by Spring Boot itself. This is the main feature in Spring Boot actually. So we no need to do anything. Before Spring Boot, in traditional Spring application, we have to do a lot of things. We have to create web.xml, we have to create configurations under XML files and bean creations, everything we are going to do that. But the moment Spring Boot came into picture, developer life become very easy. We just need to focus on writing business logic. We no need to worry about jar files and required configurations, nothing. We just need to focus on writing business logic. now I will tell you how it is going to write the business logic without doing any configuration. You can see in traditional Spring application, if you are able to see my screen, in traditional Spring application, if you want to write one simple Spring application, we have to write core. There is a different core module. We have to inject MVC. We have to add it into the pom.xml. If you want to connect database, you have to write Spring JDBC, and you have to connect with Hibernate, ORM, and XML configurations and property files, configurations and annotations, versions. Versioning also we have to maintain before Spring Boot application. We have to maintain versioning compatibility also, and manual deployment. So the moment once you build the Spring Boot application, we have to deploy into the Tomcat server manually. So, and bean configurations also we have to do. Application context we have to configure into the XML file. So lot of things, lot of these many things we have to do before Spring Boot in traditional Spring application. So once Spring Boot came into picture, we no need to worry about it, all the configurations. Okay, so now if you see auto configuration, Spring Boot, how it is working. So before that, I want you to explain architecture of uh, MVC flow, MVC architecture. Let me go and open MVC architecture. So in Spring application or Spring Boot application, if you create a web application as well as if you create a RESTful web APIs, Spring will always follow MVC architecture. What is that? MVC architecture. MVC nothing but model, view, and controller. So you can see here there is some have displayed one architecture, right? You can see browser send a request to the MVC application. So browser in the sense, so yesterday we sent the request right from the browser, localhost colon 8080 slash hello, our hello world program. So the moment I send the request from the browser, so request went to where request went, request goes to the controller. Controller nothing but you can see here we have written one controller, right? REST controller, hello world REST controller. The moment you send the request first request will go to the controller. After that model, so we haven't developed so far. So after that what we have from controller will process the request, and whatever business logic we have written inside that controller, it will process that request and it will return the results to the client. So what will happen? Request will once you send the request from the browser, request will go to the controller. Then controller will process the request, and then it will send a response back to the client. Client in the sense nothing but I send the request from the browser. I got the response from the server to the browser client. Hello Spring Boot application. So this is the MVC flow. So there is another lot of servlets and filters are being involved in during the execution. So when you send the request, first request will go to, it will not come directly to the controller. Okay, the moment you send the request from the browser, request will not go to the controller. There is another servlet being called. That servlet is called Dispatcher Servlet. What is that? Dispatcher Servlet. The moment you send a request from the browser, request will go to the Dispatcher Servlet. From the Dispatcher Servlet, will take that request. It will identify our controller with the help of, there is a set of handler mappings. Based on that handler mappings, Dispatcher Servlet will identify our controller, and then the controller will process the request again. Dispatch servlet will get that response and it will send it back to the browser. So most of the people I asked many times in interview, so can you explain me the MVC flow? So he will tell request, yeah, I will send the request from my browser or mobile phone. It will come to my controller, and it will process that request, and it will execute my business logic, and then it will return the response back to the client. So next what I asked, okay, before controller, but okay, how controller is identified? Can you answer me? So some people are able to answer, some people are able to See, blank faces, not able to answer. How our controller is identified. The moment you send the request from the browser, how our controller is identified with the help of dispatcher servlet. I will show you the document. Okay, I will share you the document. You can go through it. Dispatcher servlet. So from the dispatcher servlet, we'll take that request, and remaining process will further process will continue from dispatcher servlet, from that controller to your model or business layer, and then it will return back to the response will return back to the client or web application or mobile anywhere. So now after that, some you should I told you, right, dispatcher server is being called. So some you should not believe. Actually, some people blindly byheard it. Byheard it in the sense, okay, request will send the browser, then in that case request will taken care by dispatcher servlet, and then that dispatcher servlet will forward the request to the controller, then controller will process the request and response sending back to the client. So everybody tell this, but nobody don't know whether really after once I send the request, whether really dispatcher server is being called or not. Most of the people I asked in the interview, no one is able to answer. Sir, can you prove whether after sending the request, whether really your dispatcher server is being called or not? How you can prove that? So no answer. I don't know, sir. That is internal process. That is internal process. I don't know how it is calling. I know only controller is being called. So the moment you anyone, not only here, any institute or anywhere you learn outside or any people tell something, so request go to the controller. Below there is a dispatch servlet. So how do I know whether really the dispatch servlet is being called? So now I am going to prove you that how whether request is coming to directly controller or before that request is going to dispatcher servlet. How we can prove that? Let me show you now. Dispatcher servlet, you can see there is a dispatcher servlet. So this dispatcher servlet, one of the class, dispatcher servlet, one of the servlet. So inside this class, right, inside this class there is a, let me write dispatcher servlet instance. Why, yeah, you can dispatcher servlet. So inside that, why it is not recognizing this Eclipse? 1 second. R not opening at all. So if you go inside, this is the dispatch servlet. Dispatcher servlet is available where one of the package called org.spring framework.web.servlet. So we have during Spring Boot application creation, we have added one dependency, right? Web module. That web module contains dispatcher servlet, and also you can see I am going to prove you how this dispatch servlet is being called. So what you can do now, this is not needed for now. I'm just want you to show where this dispatch servlet is available. Dispatcher servlet is available in which package? org.springframework.web.servlet package. So now I just opened the dispatch servlet class, right? You can see here dispatcher servlet. So in dispatcher servlet, there is a methods, set of methods. You can see do service method. What is that method? You can see control O. Once you open the class, you just need to press control O. If you press control O, one window will open. There you can type do, do. So you can see two main methods are available in dispatcher servlet. What is those methods? Do service and do dispatch. So let me go to do service method. Once you click on that, you can see there is a do service method. I will just put breakpoint. So most of the people don't know how to debug also. So if you want to debug the code, you have to just there is a line number, right? Inside that any line number, you just need to double click. Once you double click, there is a breakpoint is available. So now if you want to debug whether after sending the request, Really request is coming to either controller or dispatch servlet. Now I am going to show you that. So let me start the server in debug mode. So if you want to debug that, what you have to do? So there is a top corner, there is a green button, right? This is normal mode. If you run this one, application will run in a normal mode. There is a left hand side. Here you can debug. There is a debug icon. Here you have to click on it. If you click on this icon, your server will run in debug mode. Your server will run in debug mode. Now go to the browser. So inside the now or I will do one thing. First, I will remove breakpoint from here. Let me put breakpoint first, whether my controller is being called first. Okay. So let me, our server is started successfully in debug mode. Let me go to the browser. I just send the request. So where request came? Say our controller. So request came to directory controller. Request came to directly to the controller. Most of the people will know a request will come to the controller. There is another class called dispatcher servlet is there. So some people cannot able to answer. So now here, so let me so you got right. The moment I send the request, where request will come to here controller. Now earlier, sir, you told request will go to the dispatch servlet first. From the dispatch servlet again, further request will go to the controller. But what is this? Request came to directly controller. So you said request go to the dispatcher servlet. So why now I will show you that. I have did not put the breakpoint. There is a do service method. I just kept the breakpoint now. We'll see breakpoint is available in our controller. You can see line number 13. I just added one breakpoint. Double click. Just click on double click on that specific line number. You will get the breakpoint. After next, I have added breakpoint in do service method of dispatcher servlet. Here also I added breakpoint. Now send the request from the browser. Send. I just send the request. You can see Eclipse is blinking here. So once you send the request, Eclipse is blinking. So request came to our server. You can see I have put the breakpoint in controller. I have put the breakpoint in dispatcher servlet. Which one is being called? Our dispatcher servlet is being called. So during the Spring MVC flow, the moment you send the request, first request will go to dispatcher servlet. Now you got right. Practically, I am proving that. So request goes to the dispatcher servlet. You can see there is a request object. It has do service method is having. Yesterday we discussed right what is web service. The person who is sending request from the client, that is a request, and what technically what we can call HTTP request. So this is the method. Do service method is having HTTP request, HTTP servlet request. So if you go to the request here, you can see there is a request available here. If you go inside, you can see our URL, whatever URL we have written. You can see hello world. As part of HTTP request, there is a URI hello world. You can see in browser which API I have requested. Hello world API I have requested from the client. You can see here practically as part of the request object, you can see there is a URI called hello world. You can see here. Guys, whenever you are learning, right, you should learn in depth actually, not simply theoretical knowledge, whether it is really calling dispatch servlet or not. Where is my request, where it went, how it is identified. You guys have to learn in-depth knowledge. Okay, so if you go anywhere, I am not telling other persons that they are not teaching. Some people are teaching in depth, but some people are not teaching at all. They are teaching only concept and theory part. So because of that, once you get into the development, none of the people don't know the concept. They are not able to write the program. What is what? Just blindly by heart the code, just writing it. So whenever you are learning something, you have to debug. If you want to become a good developer, you must do the debugging. Okay, if you are able to do the debug, you are going to become a perfect developer. Okay, so now you can see here, there is a request URL. So request came to the dispatcher servlet hello world slash hello world. You can see here, sir. Now from where it will go, there is another method called. So if you want, you can more go in depth. Okay, so you can go to each and every method. What is, you can see here, application context. We have discussed, right? Web application context, and everything is going going to set it as part of the request here. So here there is another method called, I show you, right? Do dispatch. Next, from the do service method, request will go to the do dispatch method. I have put breakpoint here also. So now what you can do, you can just press F8 function. So in your laptop you have key called F8, right? F8. Some of the laptops you can press directly F8. Some of the Lenovo or HP laptops, you have to press function plus F8. So click on, if you press F8, if cursor is not coming here, then you press function F8. Depends on laptop. See, from the do service method, our request come to do dispatch method. From the do dispatch method, there is set of code is written internally. You can see there is a handler method is being called. There is a handler. I told you, right, during the MVC flow execution. So dispatcher server, once you send the request will go to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will take help from, sorry, dispatcher servlet will take help from get handler adapter. There is a in that API. So based on the handler mapping, dispatch servlet will identify the your controller. How it is going to identify? Let me go. There is a handler method. You can see here. There is a handler method. Go to inside that handler method. Put breakpoint there again. Press F8. So then see request came into inside the handler method. You can, if you put cursor on handler method, you can see handler mapping. See, you can see handler execution chain. Inside that, you can see here your controller is identified. Hello world controller. Your controller is identified with the help of handler mapping. Okay, so here if you go, lot of description is your hello world controller, REST controller, and what is the method? Say hello Spring Boot application, which we have written in controller class. You can see here. If you go, what is the method which I have written as part of my API creation? Hello, say hello world Spring Boot application. If you go inside, put cursor on that, you can see that as well. You can see say hello Spring Boot application method, and your application context also initialized during the service, during the server startup. Like this, you have to debug. Okay, now I will press F8 again. So now where request will go now? From here. Okay, request came to the dispatcher servlet. So dispatcher servlet will take the help from mapping handler mapping, and then it will go to the handler mapping method, one of the chain. This is class handler execution chain class. So inside that there is a handler method is called. So here it is identified our controller. Then from there press F8 again. If you press F8, you can see request will go to our controller. You can see from the handler mapping is dispatch servlet will identify our URI with the help of handler mappings, and then from there again request will go to the control is practically proved. So the moment client send the request from the browser or anywhere, first request will go to the dispatcher servlet, and dispatch servlet is having two set of methods. What are those methods? Do service and do dispatch. So these methods will identify the handler mappings with the help of mapping handler mappings. So it will identify the appropriate URL, and then you are able, our controller is being identified, and then immediately request will send back to controller. From there again it will get send a response back to the, again it will send a request go to the dispatch servlet only. From there response is being sent from dispatch servlet to client in the sense browser. This is how you people have to learn debugging skills. Okay, so there is one more, there is a servlet framework also are there. So actually, Spring framework, everything is being built on top of servlet API. There is a advanced Java, right? After core Java, once you learn in advanced Java, there is a servlet concept. The people who is not having knowledge, don't worry, you don't know. I'm telling in-depth chair Spring Boot internally, that advanced concepts like servlets and JSP, all those things on top of Spring framework created. Okay, internal boot application or Spring application. Okay, so they are implemented it now. I will tell you one example. TVs in our homes, right? That time, how TV is, how looks like, it is very small, very small, black and white like that. Now compared to that generation TV, and now you compare to as on today's TV, how much difference is there? Day by day, they are. Someone is typing on a screen here. Who is typing? I don't know. Pritesh Kaushik. Pritesh Kaushik, kindly stop typing here on the screen. Okay, okay. Voice is breaking. Uh, let me, might be some internet issue. Yeah, am I audible now, guys? Am I audible? Can you ping in the message chat? Let me ping. Yeah, am I audible now? Can you please reply to yes or no? Am I audible? Okay, good, nice. So might be there is some network problem in middle. Okay, so now you got the right. So you got the, someone is again write writing on the displays. Okay, I will ask admin team to restrict that. Okay, so later I will do that. So now here you can see uh, where we are now. So the moment client send the request from the browser, request will go to the dispatcher servlet, and dispatch servlet will take that request. It will identify the controller with the based on the handler mappings, and our controller is being called, and then response sent back to the client. So this is how you have to learn. Okay, so now I am uh, pressing function F8. You got to know the how MVC flow, and what is the flow of the application, from where request will come, from where response will get back. Okay, so now you got to know, right, MVC flow. Okay, now come back to Spring Boot. How Spring Boot is working now. So we have not written any code, nothing we have written. So just we have downloaded the project from the initializer. Spring Boot is, I just focused on writing business logic. I just focused on writing business logic. I haven't concentrated on writing all the configurations. So Spring Boot is providing lot of features which is automatically. Let me show you how now. What all the things are available. Spring Boot features. Let's talk about Spring Boot features here. So here you can see Spring Boot feature. There is a auto configuration, MVC. You can see dispatcher servlet. So before Spring Boot, in traditional Spring application, dispatcher servlet, we have to configure manually in XML file, web.xml file, and that is done by Spring Boot by default. Now we no need to configure dispatcher servlet. Everything taken care by Spring Boot itself. Similarly, ORM framework, if you want to ORM framework, if you want to read data source, transaction management manager, everything we have to configure manually. So here Spring Boot framework, you have to just need to add the dependency. That's it. Remaining Spring Boot will take care of it. So Spring Boot is having starters. There is a Spring Boot starter web, Spring Boot starter. If your starter web is belongs to create REST APIs or under to create web applications. For that, we need Spring Boot starter web dependency is there. You can see if you go to our project explorer, there is a pom.xml. If you open pom.xml, you can see the moment we added the Spring Web module, you can see Spring Boot starter web dependency is added into pom.xml. So here this module is having all the configuration related to Spring. Okay, so next Spring Boot starter JPA. What is this starter JPA? If you want to connect with Spring Hibernate, if you want to connect with Hibernate or JPA, that I will explain you later. Okay, no need to worry. I'm just showing future. So for that, we just need to add this dependency. Similarly, rest others. And Spring Boot application is having another feature called embedded servlet container. So before before Spring Boot application, we need to download the Tomcat server manually. We have to download the Tomcat server manually, and then there is a, let me show you. Show opens perspective. There is a server others. Let me go to servers. You can see here. So the left hand side you can see, right, there is a server tab. So here we need to manually add the Tomcat server. After that, in the Tomcat server, we have to deploy our Spring application. That is done manually before Spring Boot. Now here, if you see Spring Boot come up with embedded Tomcat server, embedded servlet container, nothing but Tomcat server. And here, three different kinds of servers are supporting by Spring Boot by default. We no need to download Tomcat server. We no need to download Jetty server. We no need to download Understow. These three are default open source servers that you can use freely. These three are open source framework, open source application servers. So Spring Boot by default, these three servers are available as part of Spring Boot application. By default, Spring Boot will prefer Tomcat server. By default, Spring Boot is preferring Tomcat server. So the moment you run your Spring Boot application, the moment you run the Spring Boot application, servlet Spring container will instantiate, create the embedded server. Inside that embedded server, our application will be being deployed automatically. Then it will launch server successfully. So this is one of the another feature in Spring Boot, embedded servlet container. So next, after that, there is another, let me go another feature. There is another feature called Spring Actuators. Spring Actuators production ready feature. Spring Actuator is another feature in Spring Boot application. Actuator in the sense, before Spring Boot application, if you want to so okay, let's say you have developed the application. After that, you have deployed the server, you have deployed the project in your server. After that, you should monitor whether my server is up or not, what are the configurations available in my server, and whether server is performing well or not. All the statistics will be, we have to write code manually for that, whether my server is up or not, whether my configuration, what is the configurations are configured in our application server, and what are all the what all the logs are being logged. Everything we have to write the code. Where Spring Boot came into picture, we no need to handle those as well. Spring Boot will provide to monitor the application. Spring by default, how whatever project we are deploying into the server, that we can monitor all, by without writing the code, single piece of code without writing, we can monitor our application whether our server is up or not. So those features and all practically I will show you later. Now you people just focus on what are the features available in Spring Boot Spring Boot framework. So there is a auto config and mappings and info and health checks. All those things will be available by default in Spring Boot application. It is auto configurations, it will mappings and info belongs to auto config in the sense. So what are all the auto configurations which it is done by in Spring Boot application, those things information we can see. And mappings in the sense urls, all the mappings in the controller, whatever we have written the apis, all those things we can see with the help of mappings section. And similarly there is a info, there is a info in the sense what is this project belongs to, what are the configurations, what are all the things being involved in our project, everything will be displayed in the info section. Next, health. There is a health feature. Health in the sense our application, whether it is down, whether is successfully started, or is there any problem, those metrics we can check with the help of health api. And there is another feature called metrics. So many features are there in Spring Boot application by default. The moment we deploy the application into the server, these are all the feature by default available. Next, there is a Spring Profiles, another feature called Spring Profiles. Spring Profiles nothing but, so once before let's say you have developed the application, so before our application goes to the production, there is set of environments like developer environment, UAT environment, stage environment, and production environment. So those if you want to deploy in different environments, Spring Boot automatically will provide Spring Profiles feature. You can deploy, you can switch anywhere you can deploy your application with the help of Spring Profiles. If you configure dev environment, your application will deployed into dev environment and developer environment. If you want to deploy your application in testing environment, UAT, user acceptance testing, those things I will explain later. Focus on concept. So if you want to deploy the application in testing environment, so you can easily deploy into testing environment. If you want to deploy your application in production and stage environment, you can easily switch to deploy any kind of environments with the help of Spring Profiles. So Spring Boot is having another feature called Spring Profiles to switch your application to deploy any kind of environments. You can see here Spring Profiles is a powerful feature of Spring Boot that helps and segregate different components in your application. Using profile, you can enable or disable a component in specific environments like dev environment, UAT, stage, and prod. Okay, this is another feature. So next, go to another feature called inbuilt JUnit support. There is another feature called inbuilt JUnit support. If you are working with Spring Boot application, by default Spring Boot come up with JUnit support, inbuilt JUnit support. By default JUnit 5 is being available in Spring Boot application. Before Spring Boot application, we have to manually add dependency of JUnit framework in normal Spring applications. Whereas in Spring Boot, JUnit support will be available by default. If someone don't know what is JUnit, don't worry, I will explain you when that concept came into picture. I am showing now what are all the features are available in Spring Boot. Next concept, learning curve. Learning curve is very easy. Learning curve nothing but, if someone, you can see I have written clearly, if even if you don't have Spring knowledge, The people who is not having Spring knowledge, you are mostly like to deal with business logic. Already I told you initially, the moment we download the project from the Spring initializer, we just download the project and we have not done any single configuration. We just focus on writing our business logic. Just I have written the controller class. My requirement, what is my requirement here? I just want to display hello Spring Boot application. So I just downloaded the project. I just simply focus on my business logic, whatever I want to expecting. I just written the code. I just run the server. I got the output in the browser. That's it. So in Spring, learning Spring Boot is very easy. You do not have the people who don't have knowledge on Spring framework also can work with Spring Boot without having knowledge. Next, that is why I started with Spring Boot application initially. So once we cover all the Spring Boot concepts and with examples with real world applications, after that I am going to explain you Spring as well. Traditional Spring, traditional Spring is working before Spring Boot. Okay, guys. So after that, there is a architecture, Spring Boot architecture. So before that, I just wanted to summarize what are the features available in Spring Boot. Let me show you one by one. Auto configuration, the very first feature. What is that? Auto configuration. What is the second one? Spring Boot starters. Spring Boot starter in the sense you no need to add the dependencies manually. The moment you download the project, your application is ready to start without doing any configuration. That is another feature called Spring Boot starters dependencies. Next, so there is a embedded servlet another feature called embedded servlet container. So you no need to download the server manually. Spring Boot come up with default servlet, default servers. Those are Tomcat, Jetty, and Undertow. There is another feature called Spring Boot Actuators. It is production ready feature. So you can monitor your application after deploying into the server. You no need to write the code for it. The moment you download the project, you can deploy into the server. You can monitor your application and you can perform health checks of your application with the help of Spring Boot actuators. There is another feature called Spring Profile. By using Spring Profiles, you can switch any environment to deploy your application like Dev, UAT, Stage, and Prod. And next, there is another feature called JUnit support. Spring Boot come up with JUnit support by default JUnit 5. Next, another feature called without having Spring knowledge, any people can learn Spring Boot application. They just need to focus on writing business logic. You no need to worry about it. All the configuration which is needed for Spring application. Now, come back to Spring Boot architecture. This is the architecture of Spring Boot. So you can see Postman in the sense we can send the Postman is one of the client. So here how we have tested our application from the browser. Here who is our client? Browser is our client. So similarly there is so here one example given from a Postman client, one of the client. From here assume as of now you assume this is one browser. Okay, so let's request send to you can see once the client send the request from the client, and then request will go to the controller, and then controller will process the request to the service layer, and service layer will, will talk to business layer, sorry, DAO layer, and then your DAO layer will talk to your database. Then response also will come in same direction. Request will go to the controller, controller will go to the service, from service to DAO, and DAO will talk to your database. This is the architecture of Spring Boot application Spring Boot application, as well as Spring MVC application. Traditional Spring and Spring Boot both are having same architecture. What is the difference? In traditional Spring application, all the configurations you have to do manually. Whereas Spring Boot application, you no need to do the configuration. By default, all the configurations is available. That is the only difference between Spring Boot and Spring Framework. You guys understood, right? Architecture is same, whether it is Spring Boot or whether it is some traditional Spring application. Uh, Architecture is same. The only what is the difference? The whatever configurations are going to what are all the configurations required for our application, that is done manually in a Spring application, traditional Spring application, and in a Spring Boot application, you no need to perform those all the configurations manually. That is the only difference. So and also I explained one more thing. When you client send the request will not go to the controller directly. Where request will go? Request will go to the dispatcher servlet in middle. The client, there is a client and controller. Your server there is a in client and server. Before request come to the controller, there is a dispatcher servlet. Request will go to the dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will forward the request to the controller, then controller will goes to the service, then service will go to the repository layer. From there it will talk to database. I will explain you later what is controller, sorry, what is service layer, what is DO layer. Everything we are going to develop with application, one real world project we are going to create it. Okay, you have to understood the concept. During the Spring Boot architect controller, that is what we have written yesterday. Hello World REST controller. The moment you download the project from the Spring initializer, you just focused on business logic. That is what is the first step during during the Spring or during the Spring Boot architecture. What is the first step we have to write? There is a controller available during the Spring Boot flow. Spring Boot diagram says request will goes to the controller. So controller. So that is the reason. So I just write one method to return the response. Hello Spring Boot application. Now you people are understood properly uh, why we have written the controller. If I told yesterday, you people will not understand. That's the reason. First I will write the code. Then once execution is started successfully, I will show you the uh, architecture. You guys can easily. Okay. So guys, this is now tomorrow onwards we are going to write one simple a few simple APIs to create social media application. Okay, social media application in the sense, in social media how many people will be the social media in the sense, who will be there in social media? Users and clients. Users are who are all using internet, who are all browsing the using the browser, internet or Instagram, those kind of users. And simple, you can call it as a users. We are going to create one simple APIs on users. Okay, user API we are going to create tomorrow. I will explain you. It is very easy. So let me write one simple method to return date API. Let me write to make you understand. Not only hello world application, whichever you want, just write the program and change the method name. What is the method name? Let me today's date. Today's date. That's it. Let me stop the server as of now. Terminate date. Okay. So there is a class called local date. Right, local date is available in our JDK, from it is available from JDK feature. So now I will return just new local, sorry, you can write directly local date. It is a, there is static methods are available. Now that's it. The local date is a class and it has a static method called now method. So what I have done, local date, I'm just returning, I'm just local date dot now. I am going to get the local date now. So what is the API? Today's date. Let me create the today's date. today's date. So I have created one simple API, today's date, that will return what is the date today. So now let me start the server. Server is started successfully. So now go to the browser. I have copied the URL, right? URI. Just go to the browser, paste it. See, you can see date API is date is returned. My server is returning today's date. What is the date today? October 6th, 2023. So now if you want to debug, sir, here I have two methods. Really, my request went to here or here. So I will put breakpoint here. I will put another breakpoint here. Let me run my server in debug mode. If you have to learn debugging skills also, guys. Initial from starting now onwards, whenever you are going to create the application, any application, whenever you are going to write any application, you always debug your code whether my request is coming here or not. Okay, so now I just put the breakpoint here. Let me go to which API I'm going to call. Oh, spell mistake. That is not correct. Do this. Sorry. Today's date. Let me stop again. So as of now, we have added only one dependencies, right? Whenever we are modifying something, if you want to reflect those changes, we must stop the server and we must restart the server. So every time we have to do it or not? What? So some people may ask questions, sir, every time we have to restart the server? No. So this is initial step. I am showing you later point of time. There is another dependency. If you add the dependency, we no need to restart the server every time. That I will explain you later. Okay, so as of now, you concentrate on basic Spring Boot application. Okay, if you basic Spring Boot application, if Spring Web Module, the moment you add only Spring Web Module, whenever you are modifying the class or whenever any changes, not only in class, any changes which you have done in our application, if you want to reflect those changes, you have to restart the server. Any classes or property files, anything if you modify, you must restart the server to reflect those changes. Okay, so now today's date, let me copy, go to browser and paste it, click enter. You are getting the time. So I didn't run the debug mode. Let me run the debug mode. I think let me run the debug mode. I just how we can run the debug mode. There is a button called left hand side. You can see debug option. Here you have to click, or you can right click on the project. Where you can right click, you can directly right click on the project. There is an option called debug as, run as will always run normal mode. If you want to run, there is a debug as also. This is another way of running the application. Here you can directly debug as Java application. If you click on that, your application will run in debug mode. So now I just executed in debug mode. Let me send the request. I just send the request. You can see Eclipse is blinking in bottom of our uh, tab. So you can see here. See, okay, request came to Dispatcher Servlet. Why? Because earlier I have kept the breakpoint here, right? So I am removing breakpoint here now. So before going to before going to request to the controller, request went to the Dispatcher Servlet. So why I have put the breakpoint here to prove whether Dispatcher Servlet is being called or not. So I am removing breakpoints now. Okay, so after removing breakpoints, it will directly goes to the my controller. See, date API is being called. The moment you send the request from the browser, request goes to the work controller. You can see, yes, it's came to my controller. My API is being called. If you want to inspect. So what is the value here? So without showing, without without seeing in the browser directly, you can debug the value in your controller itself. How you can debug your value? Just select that statement, local data.now, right click. There is a option called inspect element. There is a option called inspect element. You can see if you come down, there is a inspect. Just click on that inspect. You can see what is the value it is returning. Okay, so this is how developer has to debug your code, whichever you have written. Now, just I'm terminating the debug point. Yeah, what you have, if you want to terminate the debug point, what you have to press F8. You just need to press F8 in any one of the laptop. If F8 is not working, then what you have to do? You have to press function F8. If you press function F8 or F8, request will pass successfully. Now 2023 October 6th date is returned. Okay, guys, I think most of the people understood, right? What is here? What we have learned today? MVC, what is the flow of MVC application? So from where request will go to our server directly. So all the and what are all the features in Spring Boot applications? We went so far today. Okay, guys, we'll catch you tomorrow. And guys, make sure you guys have to practice this. Whatever I have done in the class, you have to practice this. Practice. You have to write the simple APIs, whatever your own application. Okay, write it. Put the breakpoint. Check whether dispatch servlet is being called or not. Check your controller is being called or not, and check you can debug what is the value contains. What is the response it contains. What is the value? So you have to debug. Okay, we'll catch you tomorrow, guys.